6 years ago, the world watched when O'Reilly burned to ashes in a car wreck that left nothing behind but twisted metal, blood, and a wedding ring. Her husband never recovered. For 6 brutal years, Vance Robert mastered the art of pretending. Cold smiles for the cameras. Empty nights drowned in whiskey. A billionaire feared by the world, yet haunted by the ghost of the only woman he ever loved. Until one night, she walked back into his life, alive. At a high-profile charity function, beneath glittering chandeliers and flashing cameras, Vance froze. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the marble floor. Because standing only feet away was Winnie. Not a ghost. Not a hallucination. Her. More beautiful than the day she died. A little girl clung to her hand while 2 identical boys stood beside her, triplets with Vance's icy blue eyes, his sharp jawline, his blood, and another man's arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The entire room went silent. But the most terrifying part? Winnie looked directly at Vance, with absolutely no recognition in her eyes. No love. No hatred. Nothing. Just the polite concern a stranger would offer before turning back to her children. Because the woman who once swore to love him forever no longer remembered the man she married for 5 years. So where had she been all this time? Who took her? Why was her death staged? And why do the children look exactly like the husband she no longer remembers? Some secrets should have stayed buried, but the dead always find their way back. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into this unbelievable story of betrayal, lost memories, and a love that refused to die, let us know in the comments below where you are watching from. For 6 long years, Vance Robert had been a ghost living in a billionaire's suit. He was the golden boy of the elite, a man whose face was constantly captured by paparazzi, always maintaining a flawless, cold composure. He had built impenetrable walls around his heart the day the police pulled his wife's mangled car from the river and told him there were no survivors. He had worn black to her empty casket, endured his family's suffocating, fake condolences, and poured his soul into his work. But tonight, the glass of whiskey in his hand slipped through his fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp amber liquid splashing across his polished shoes. The entire ballroom went still. Vance did not care about the stares. His eyes were locked on a woman standing near the entrance. She wore a simple, elegant emerald dress, her hair pinned up just the way she used to wear it when they were 22 and deeply in love. It was Winnie. It was his Winnie. Beside her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a gentle face, his arm looped securely around her waist. And gathered around them were 3 small children, a mix of boys and girls, whose eyes and smiles were a terrifyingly perfect mirror of both Vance and Winnie. Winnie felt the weight of the intense stare across the room and snapped her gaze toward him. There was no flash of recognition in her eyes. No tears of joy, no shock. She merely looked surprised by the sudden silence his broken glass had caused. She wondered for a few seconds if everything was okay, giving Vance a polite, distant look of concern before turning back to adjust her daughter's color. She could not recognize the man she had been married to for 5 years, the man who had loved her beyond measure despite the bitter whispers of his wealthy family. Vance took a step forward, his breath trapped in his throat, but his assistant quickly stepped in his path, murmuring about the press and the cameras. By the time Vance pushed past, the crowd had shifted, and the woman who looked exactly like his dead wife had vanished into the VIP lounge. Later that night, the grand gala ended, but the silence in Vance's penthouse was deafening. He sat in the dark, staring at the old silver ring he still kept in his pocket. His mind raced back to how it all began. They had met in college. Vance was the guy every girl wanted, the privileged heir to an influential empire, but he was drowning in the expectations of his family. Winnie was the quiet type, a girl with a gentle spirit and a deep, unshakable faith in God. She didn't have money, but she had peace. Vance had been drawn to that peace. He helped her navigate the rough waters of the campus social elite, and in turn, her quiet strength helped him find his own footing in life. It wasn't about religion, it was about the profound impact they had on each other's souls. They married at 22, naive and completely devoted. But his family hated her. The Roberts were old money, powerful, and deeply hypocritical. His mother put on the facade of a devout woman, but she possessed a heart of stone. To the Roberts, Winnie was dirt. They wanted Vance to marry a girl from their own circle, someone spotless by their elitist standards. Worst of all was the strict family tradition. Once married, the eldest son had to live in the same grand estate as the parents. For 5 years, Winnie endured the silent warfare. The breaking point came when she couldn't conceive in the first year. His mother used it as a weapon, framing it as a curse. They even tried to frame Vance, engineering a scandal with the wealthy woman they had originally chosen for him. But Winnie had trusted her husband completely. She knew his heart. When the world threw mud at them, she simply held Vance's hand and told him they would get through it. Then came the rainy night 6 years ago. Winnie had been driving home alone. The brakes failed on the winding mountain road, and her car plunged into the raging river below. Vance was told she was gone forever. He didn't know that she had been pregnant that night. She hadn't even known it herself. A few days later, Vance stood outside a private estate on the outskirts of the city. He had used every resource, every private investigator at his disposal to track down the family from the Gala. He found them living a quiet, affluent life in a secluded suburban villa. Inside that villa, Winnie was setting the table for dinner. The man from the Gala, Thomas, walked into the kitchen and kissed her temple. Thomas was a lonely man, a wealthy doctor whose wife had passed away years ago, leaving him empty. 6 years ago, he had been walking near the riverbank far downstream when he spotted a woman washed ashore, barely breathing. He had saved her. When she woke up in his private clinic days later, her mind was a blank slate. The trauma and the accident had wiped her memory completely. The doctor who examined her told Thomas that the amnesia might be permanent. Seeing her vulnerability and discovering she was pregnant with triplets, Thomas had made a selfish, desperate choice born of his intense loneliness. He told her they were married. He told her she had been in an accident that caused her memory loss, but that he was her husband, and those were their children. Winnie, having no reason to doubt the gentle man who nursed her back to health, believed him. Thomas had taken impeccable care of her and the triplets. He loved her from the bottom of his heart, and over the years, Winnie had grown to love him too, grateful for the beautiful life and the father he had been to her children. A knock on the villa door shattered the evening peace. Thomas went to answer it. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with Vance Robert. The two men stood in the doorway, an unspoken, suffocating tension instantly rising between them. Thomas recognized Vance immediately from the business news, and a cold dread gripped his chest. "Who is it, Thomas?" Winnie's voice called out from the kitchen. She walked into the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. When her eyes fell on Vance, she froze. A strange, unfamiliar ache blossomed in her chest. She didn't know him, yet looking at his tired, piercing eyes made her lungs feel tight. "Can I help you?" Winnie asked, her voice soft, natural, and entirely polite. Vance swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to scream her name. He wanted to push past Thomas and pull her into his arms, to tell her about the 5 years of marriage they shared and the 6 years of hell he had endured without her. But he saw the way she looked at Thomas, the calm trust in her eyes, and he saw the 3 children peeking from the living room. "I am looking for Thomas," Vance said, his voice straining to remain steady. "We have a legal matter to discuss regarding some medical properties. It won't take long." Thomas nodded quickly, his face pale. Winnie, please give us a moment outside. Winnie looked between the two men, a subtle frown marring her forehead. Something felt incredibly wrong. The air was thick with a danger she couldn't define. She looked at Vance one last time, her gaze lingering on his lips, on the structure of his jaw, feeling a bizarre sense of déjà vu that made her dizzy. She nodded slowly and retreated back into the house. Out on the quiet pavement, away from the windows, Vance turned on Thomas. His composure was entirely gone now, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "That is my wife," Vance hissed, his voice a lethal whisper. "Those are my children." Thomas did not flinch, even as Vance stepped closer, his towering frame casting a long, dark shadow over the porch. The doctor took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders, his expression hardening with a fierce, protective instinct. "You need to leave, Mr. Robert," Thomas said, his voice remarkably steady despite the terror pounding in his chest. "You are mistaken. I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but that woman inside is my wife. Those children are mine." Vance let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded more like a growl. "Mistaken? You think I don't know the woman I held in my arms for 5 years? You think I don't recognize my own eyes looking back at me from those kids? You stole her from me, Thomas. You took advantage of a tragedy, and I will see you rot in a cell for this." "Go ahead and try," Thomas countered, stepping closer until they were nearly chest to chest. "Who is going to believe you?" "To the world. Winnie Robert died 6 years ago. There are death certificates. There are police reports. If you drag this into court, you will tear her fragile mind apart. Do you think she will just believe a billionaire stranger who shows up at her door claiming to be her ghost from the past? She loves me. She knows me as her husband. If you truly loved her, you wouldn't do this to her." Every word out of Thomas's mouth felt like a physical blow to Vance's chest. The sheer audacity of this man, standing on a porch paid for with medical money, defending a life built on a foundation of stolen time, snapped the last thread of Vance's legendary composure. 6 years of agonizing grief, 6 years of drinking himself to sleep, and 6 years of endless guilt boiled over in a single fraction of a second. Vance reached out, his large hand wrapping securely around Thomas's throat, slamming him backward against the brick pillar of the porch. "Say that again," Vance hissed, his voice dangerously low, his eyes burning with an unstable fire. "Tell me again how my freaking wife belongs to you." Thomas gasped for air, his hands clutching at Vance's iron wrists, but he refused to apologize or back down. His eyes remained defiant, fueled by his own deep, desperate love for the family he had raised. A sharp gasp shattered the dark night air. "Get your hands off him." Vance's heart stopped. He turned his head slowly to see Winnie standing in the open doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror and anger. Behind her legs, the 3 small children were huddled together, wide-eyed and trembling, clutching their mother's skirt. Winnie didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, grabbing Vance's arm, trying with all her small strength to pull him away from Thomas. "Let him go. What is wrong with you?" Winnie screamed, her voice cracking with fierce protectiveness. "Let my husband go right now, or I swear to God I am calling the police." Vance's grip loosened. His hand dropped to his side as if he had been burned. He stumbled back a step, his chest heaving, his gaze locking onto Winnie's face. The anger that had consumed him a moment ago evaporated, replaced by a profound, agonizing hurt. She wasn't looking at him with the love they had shared since they were 22. She was looking at him like he was a monster, a dangerous, unhinged criminal who had just attacked the man she believed was her protector. Winnie immediately stepped in front of Thomas, checking his neck, her hands trembling as she smoothed down his collar. "Are you okay? Thomas, look at me. Are you hurt?" I'm fine, Winnie, Thomas choked out, coughing slightly, though he kept his eyes on Vance, watching the billionaire crumble from the inside out. Winnie turned back to Vance, her breathing ragged. Her eyes were flashing with a fire Vance hadn't seen since their college days, but this time, it was directed entirely at him. I don't care who you are or what kind of business you think you have with Thomas, she said, her voice dropping into a sharp, defensive edge. You stay away from my family. Look at what you did to my children. They're terrified. Get off our property before I make sure you spend the night in a jail cell. Vance looked past her toward the doorway. The 3 children, his children, were staring at him with pure fear. One of the little boys was crying silently, hiding his face in his sister's shoulder. They didn't see a father. They saw a threat. The pain was so intense Vance felt like he was suffocating. He wanted to open his mouth and tell her everything, but the raw terror in her eyes stopped him. Thomas was right about one thing. If he forced the truth on her right now, he would break her completely. I'm sorry, Vance whispered, his voice trembling so much it was barely audible. I made a mistake. He backed down the porch steps, his eyes never leaving Winnie's face. He saw the subtle flicker of confusion pass over her features again, that tiny, involuntary hesitation that always happened when she looked too closely at him. But she didn't call him back. She tightly gripped Thomas's hand, pulled him inside, and slammed the heavy wooden door shut. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place echoed through the quiet street like a gunshot. Later that night, Vance sat on the cold floor of his penthouse apartment. The glittering lights of the city stretched out below him, but his world was completely dark. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't reach for the whiskey bottle. Instead, he dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as the tears finally came. He hadn't prayed since the night the police told him Winnie's car had gone over the bridge. He had felt abandoned, angry, and cursed. But tonight, the desperation in his soul forced him back to his knees. God, Vance sobbed, his voice echoing in the empty, luxurious room. You kept her alive. You saved her when I couldn't. Please, I am begging you, don't leave her in that lie. Restore her memory. Heal her mind. Give me back my wife. Give me back my children. Show me how to save them without destroying her. I can't do this alone. He stayed on his knees until the early hours of the morning, pouring out 6 years of built-up grief, finding a strange, quiet strength in the middle of his brokenness. A few days later, the sun was shining brightly over a quiet suburban elementary school. The afternoon bell rang, and a flood of children rushed out of the front doors, laughing and shouting as they headed toward the pickup line. Among them were the Triplets. They walked together, carrying their backpacks, their identical blue eyes scanning the crowd of parents. Vance stood by the school gate. He had traded his expensive custom suit for a simple, casual jacket and jeans. He didn't want to look like the intimidating billionaire from the Gala. He wanted to look approachable. As the 3 children walked past, Vance stepped forward gently, keeping his distance so he wouldn't scare them. Hey there, Vance said, his voice soft and warm. The Triplets stopped. The little girl, who possessed Winnie's exact nose and stubborn jawline, narrowed her eyes. She immediately stepped in front of her brothers, mimicking the protective stance her mother had taken nights before. You're the mean man from our porch, she said sharply, her little voice full of suspicion. The one who hurt our daddy. Vance felt a sharp stab in his chest at the word asterisk. Daddy, but he forced a kind, gentle smile to his face. He knelt down so he was at eye level with them, keeping his hands loosely in his pockets so he didn't look threatening. You're right, I was very mean that night, Vance said naturally, looking directly into their eyes. And I feel really, really bad about it. I came here today because I wanted to apologize to you guys. I had a really bad day and I lost my temper. It wasn't right and I shouldn't have scared you. The two boys peeked out from behind their sister. The taller boy looked at the shiny watch on Vance's wrist and then at his face. "Our daddy said you were a bad man." "I made a big mistake," Vance admitted, his heart aching with an emotional weight he refused to let show on his face. He kept his composure perfectly, giving them the warm, stable presence they deserved. "But I promise you, I'm not a bad man. In fact, I brought something to prove I'm sorry." Vance reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 small, beautifully crafted wooden puzzles, intricate designs that required patience and logic to solve. He remembered how much Winnie used to love mind games and puzzles when they were in college. "These are for you," Vance said, placing them gently on the brick ledge beside them. "You don't have to take them if you don't want to, but they're a peace offering." The children looked at the puzzles, their curiosity clearly winning over their fear. The little girl stepped forward, her small fingers touching the smooth wood. "Did you make these?" "No, but I know how to solve them," Vance smiled, his eyes softening completely. "If you ever get stuck, you can ask me next time." A sharp, familiar voice cut through the afternoon air. "What are you doing here?" Vance stood up slowly, turning to face Winnie. She had just arrived, her face flushed from walking fast, her eyes dark with immediate defensiveness. She quickly pulled the triplets behind her, looking at Vance as if he were a predator caught in the act. "Winnie," Vance said, his voice calm, entirely respectful. "I was just leaving." "I told you to stay away from my family," she said, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "Do I need to call the school security? Why are you bothering my children?" "I'm not bothering them," Vance said softly, taking a step back to show he wasn't a threat. "I came to apologize. The way I behaved at your house the other night was completely unacceptable. I lost my temper with Thomas over a business disagreement, and it was wrong of me to bring that negative energy to your home and scare your kids. I wanted to look them in the eye and tell them I was sorry." Winnie blinked, completely thrown off balance by his calm, reasonable tone. She had expected the aggressive, violent man from the porch. Instead, she was looking at someone who seemed incredibly grounded, sincere, and deeply apologetic. She looked down at the wooden puzzles on the ledge, then back up at Vance. Her defensive posture softened just a fraction, but her eyes remained guarded. "You shouldn't have come here," Winnie said, her voice less sharp now, but still firm. "My children don't need apologies from strangers. We just want to live our lives in peace." "I understand," Vance replied. His throat felt incredibly dry, and the urge to reach out and touch her hand was almost overpowering. He could see the faint pulse in her neck, the familiar way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. He felt an overwhelming wave of emotion, but he clamped down on it, keeping his facial expression neutral, professional, and kind. "I won't disturb you again. I just needed to make things right. I hope you can forgive me." Winnie didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. As she stared at Vance's face, a sudden, blinding flash of pain shot through her temples. The bright afternoon sun seemed to warp for a fraction of a second. In her mind's eye, the school parking lot vanished, replaced by the blurry vision of a crowded college library. She saw a younger version of the man standing in front of her, laughing, dropping a stack of books right in front of her desk, his eyes full of life and warmth. She heard his voice saying, "Is this seat taken, or are you going to keep studying until your brain melts?" Winnie gasped softly, her hand flying to her forehead as a sharp, throbbing ache blossomed behind her eyes. She stumbled back half a step. "Winnie? Are you okay?" Vance asked, his instinct taking over as he reached out a hand to steady her, though he stopped himself before making contact. The vision vanished as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a dull, lingering ache and a sense of profound disorientation. Winnie shook her head, her breathing slightly uneven as she looked back at Vance. The familiarity was stronger now, heavy and terrifying, pressing down on her chest like a physical weight. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice breathless as she gripped her purse tightly. "Just a headache. Please, just leave us alone." Vance nodded slowly, his heart breaking for her as he recognized the signs of her struggling mind. "I'm leaving. Take care of yourself, Winnie." He turned and walked away, his steps slow and deliberate. Winnie watched his retreating back until he disappeared around the corner. She stood frozen for a long moment, the dull pain in her head refusing to fade, while her children quietly picked up the wooden puzzles from the ledge, completely unaware of the silent storm raging inside their mother's mind. The private investigator had done his job with frightening speed, but the paperwork sitting on the desk of Vance's penthouse office offered no comfort. It was a forensic breakdown of a 6-year-old crime scene. The mechanical report on the crushed remains of Winnie's old sedan confirmed a clean, deliberate cut through the main brake lines. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a rainy night tragedy. It was murder, meticulously planned and executed with cold precision. Vance stared at the documents, his chest tightening with a dangerous, familiar rage. He knew exactly whose signature was indirectly stamped on those severed lines. His mother, the grand matriarch of the Robert family, a woman who spoke of purity and tradition while holding the strings of a lethal web. The urge to drive to the family estate and tear it apart brick by brick burned in his veins, but the memory of the sheer terror in Winnie's eyes when he had attacked Thomas stopped him. Violence had almost cost him everything on that porch. It had made him a monster in the eyes of his own children. Needing a voice of absolute truth, Vance drove out of the city that evening, steering his car toward a modest, brightly lit home on the edge of the university campus. He knocked on the door and was greeted by a tall, silver-haired man with kind eyes. Pastor Elijah had been Vance's spiritual mentor during his college years, the man who had guided a cynical, angry young billionaire toward peace, and the man who had eventually stood before Vance and Winnie to bless their marriage at 22. Pastor Elijah listened in absolute, stunned silence as Vance poured out the entire impossible story. He didn't interrupt once, even when Vance's voice cracked with emotion as he described the triplets and the absolute blankness in Winnie's eyes. When Vance finally finished, his hands tightly gripping a cup of tea that had long gone cold, the older man sighed deeply, leaning forward. "Getting violent will not undo the damage," Vance Elijah said, his voice a calm, anchoring weight in the quiet room. "Anger is a natural response to this level of betrayal, but you cannot fight a spiritual and psychological battle with physical force. If you attack Thomas, you validate the lie he told her. You become the villain he warned her about. Then what do I do?" Vance asked, his eyes bloodshot, desperate. "She looks at me and sees a stranger. She looks at a liar and sees her husband. How do I fight that?" "The human mind is fragile, Vance, but the spirit remembers what the brain forgets," Elijah replied gently. "You two didn't just share a marriage certificate, you shared a foundation built on something deeper. Do you remember where you first truly connected with her?" Vance's mind immediately drifted back. The campus library. The old courtyard behind the chapel. "Bring her back there," Elijah advised, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "Don't force her to remember a 5-year marriage she has no context for. Recreate the beginning. Let her experience the essence of how you two first met. The brain might block the trauma, but the soul recognizes familiar love. Take her to the place where it all began, and let God do the rest. Medical history says her amnesia might be permanent, but I believe the one who kept her alive in that river can restore her mind." The advice settled deep into Vance's heart. He didn't just need to prove Thomas was a liar, he needed to give Winnie her identity back. But to do that, he needed time alone with her, and he knew Thomas would never allow it willingly. The next morning, Vance called in the only people he could trust with a mission this delicate, his old inner circle from his university days. "Julian, an influential event planner, and Christian, a high-ranking corporate strategist. They had been the groomsmen at his wedding, and they had mourned Winnie by his side. Hearing that she was alive mutated their grief into a fierce, unshakable loyalty. "We need to keep Thomas completely occupied for an entire afternoon," Vance explained over a secure line. "He's a doctor, deeply involved in private clinical research. If he suspects I'm near Winnie, he'll pack up the kids and disappear." "Leave it to us," Julian responded, his tone sharpening with determination. "Christian and I will handle it. We'll engineer an emergency medical seminar and a charity funding board meeting that his clinic cannot legally or financially afford to miss. We'll keep him trapped in a boardroom across town for 4 hours straight." While his friends laid the trap for Thomas, Vance took a deep breath and made a direct phone call to the suburban villa. Winnie answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "Winnie, it's Vance Robert," he said quickly, keeping his voice incredibly soft, natural, and devoid of the heavy intensity that usually unnerved her. "Please don't hang up. I'm calling because the university is hosting a quiet, small alumni memorial benefit this Thursday afternoon. It's for the community outreach program that the old scholarship fund used to support. I know you don't remember, but your name is still attached to a legacy grant there. They need a signature to release the funds for the children's sector." Winnie held the phone to her ear, her heart fluttering with a sudden, strange nervousness. She should have said no. Thomas had strictly told her to avoid this man, warning her that high society billionaires often used legal traps to manipulate people. But the mention of a children's sector and a legacy grant touched something deep inside her. "Is it just a signature?" she asked, her voice cautious but sweet. "Just a signature and a walk through the old campus," Vance promised. "I can pick you up, or you can meet me at the old university library courtyard. It's entirely public, completely safe. I just want to show you something." Winnie hesitated, looking out the kitchen window at the bright suburban sunshine. For the past 48 hours, her head had been throbbing with a persistent, dull ache. Every time she looked at Thomas, she felt a terrible guilt because her mind kept wandering back to the stranger with the piercing blue eyes. She needed answers. She needed to know why her body reacted so intensely to a man she had never met before. "I'll meet you there," Winnie said softly. "Thursday at 2. When Thursday afternoon arrived, the plan went into motion with absolute precision. Christian and Julian had successfully intercepted Thomas at his clinic, drawing him into an unscheduled, high-stakes investment meeting regarding his medical properties. Thomas had tried to call Winnie to check in, but Julian had intentionally staged a network disruption within the high-security corporate facility, keeping the doctor temporarily cut off from the outside world. At exactly 2 o'clock, Winnie walked through the grand archway of the old university campus. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair flowing loosely over her shoulders. The air was warm, smelling of fresh-cut grass and old stone. Vance was waiting for her by the stone steps of the library. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, looking exactly like the young man who used to wait for her after her theology classes. "You made it," Vance said, a genuine, heartbreakingly beautiful smile breaking across his face. Winnie looked around the courtyard, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over her. The cobblestone path beneath her feet felt intensely familiar. The way the shadows of the oak trees fell across the grass made her heart thump against her ribs. "This place," she whispered, her eyes wide as she looked up at the towering Gothic library windows. "It feels like I've dreamed about it." "You spent hundreds of hours here," Vance said naturally, stepping up beside her, keeping a respectful distance so she wouldn't feel crowded. "Come inside. I want to show you where we used to study." They walked into the grand, quiet library. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air. Vance led her toward the very back, near a secluded window alcove that looked out over the campus chapel. On the wooden table, Vance had carefully arranged a small stack of specific books, the exact textbooks on ancient history and philosophy she had carried during her senior year. Beside them sat a simple, small cup of chamomile tea, exactly how she used to drink it when she was stressed about exams. Winnie stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes locked onto the table. Her breathing became shallow. Vance stepped around the table, picked up a heavy leather-bound volume, and intentionally let it slip from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, resounding thud that echoed through the quiet alcove. Winnie gasped, her body flinching slightly at the sudden noise. Vance looked up at her, his blue eyes softening with an ocean of memory. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice dropping into a specific, playful cadence. "Or are you going to keep studying until your brain completely melts?" The words hit Winnie like a physical shockwave. A sharp, stabbing pain flared violently behind her temples. She gripped the edge of the wooden table, her eyes widening as the library around her seemed to blur and spin. The dull ache she had carried for days erupted into a kaleidoscope of brilliant, terrifyingly clear images. The blurry visions she had experienced before suddenly sharpened into high-definition reality. She saw herself, 21 years old, sitting at this exact table, looking up in annoyance as a devastatingly handsome, arrogant Vance Robert dropped his books in front of her. She saw the cocky smile on his face melt into genuine awe as he looked at her. "I'm Vance," the memory version of his voice echoed perfectly in her ears. "I know who you are," her own past voice replied in her mind. "You're the guy who disrupts the entire row every Tuesday. And you're the girl who ignores me. I wanted to see if you were real." The memory shifted violently, like pages turning in a storm. She saw the same library, but it was raining outside. She was crying over a failed assignment, and Vance was sitting beside her, his large hand gently covering hers, his voice fiercely protective. "Hey, look at me. Your faith is stronger than this exam, Winnie. You're going to change the world, and I'm going to be right here watching you do it." Another shift. A tiny apartment. The smell of cheap pasta. Vance dropping to one knee on a cracked linoleum floor, holding a simple silver ring, his eyes full of tears. "I don't care what my family says, Winnie. I don't care about the money. I just want you. Forever." Winnie cried out softly, a tear escaping her eye as she pressed her palms against her forehead. The sheer volume of the memories flooding into her brain was overwhelming, tearing through the thick walls of her amnesia like a tidal wave breaking a dam. "Winnie." Vance stepped forward, completely abandoning his restraint. He caught her by the shoulders as her knees buckled, guiding her gently into the wooden chair. "Winnie, look at me. Breathe. Just breathe." She looked up at him through a blur of hot tears. The blankness was gone. The polite, distant concern of a stranger was entirely erased. In its place was a chaotic, devastating storm of recognition, confusion, and raw heartbreak. She looked at his sharp jawline, his icy blue eyes, the specific way his hands held her shoulders, hands that had held her through 5 years of joy and silent family warfare. "Vance," she whispered, her voice cracking, sounding incredibly small, natural, and utterly devastated. You were there. We were married." Vance dropped to his knees in front of her chair, his own eyes filling with tears that he no longer tried to hide. "Yes, Winnie. We were married. For 5 years, you were my entire world. But Thomas..." Winnie stammered, her chest heaving as she struggled to process the monumental lie she had been living. "The children. He told me we were married. He told me the accident. He said he was my husband." "He lied to you, Winnie," Vance said softly, his voice trembling with a profound, aching tenderness as he reached up, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her pale cheek. "He found you by the river after the accident. You had lost your memory, and he kept you in that lie because he was lonely. But those triplets, they have my eyes, Winnie. They have your spirit. They are our children. You were pregnant the night you went into that water." Winnie buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the magnitude of the betrayal crashed down on her. 6 years. 6 years of loving a man who had stolen her identity, a man who had raised her children under a false name, a man she had trusted completely. The life she thought she knew was a beautifully constructed fiction, a gilded cage built by a lonely doctor. And yet, looking at Vance kneeling before her, the profound, unshakable love radiating from him felt more real than anything she had experienced in the last 6 years. It was an anchor in the middle of a roaring sea. The medical files say a trauma that severe can permanently lock the mind, Vance whispered, his forehead gently resting against her trembling knees, his hands holding hers tightly. "The doctors told me you were gone forever. But I don't care about the medical histories. I don't care what the world says is impossible. I spent the last few nights on my knees, Winnie. I asked the God you always trusted to do what man couldn't. I believe he can heal you. I believe he already is." Winnie closed her eyes, the sharp pain in her head slowly beginning to subside, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth. The library, the smell of the old books, the steady, rhythmic beat of Vance's heart beneath her fingers, it was all coming back. The fog was lifting, exposing the raw, beautiful truth of a love that a river couldn't drown, and a family that was waiting to be made whole again. The grand mahogany doors of the Robert family estate swung open with a heavy, resounding thud. Inside the opulent dining room, Victoria Robert sat at the head of the table, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. She looked up, her cold, aristocratic features twisting into a look of utter disbelief as her son walked into the room. But Vance wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her head held high, was Winnie. She didn't look like the quiet, easily intimidated 22-year-old girl who had endured the family's silent cruelty years ago. She wore a tailored cream suit, her eyes flashing with a fierce, unbreakable strength. And holding her hands on either side were the triplets, their sharp blue eyes surveying the grand room with curious innocence. Victoria's cup shattered against the saucer, spilling dark tea across the spotless white tablecloth. "Winnie?" she whispered, her voice cracking as the blood drained entirely from her face. You were dead." "The dead always find their way back, Mother," Vance said, his voice a calm, lethal baritone that echoed through the high ceilings. "Especially when they have justice to deliver." A few days later, a stack of legal documents and forensic breakline analysis was delivered directly to the federal prosecutor's office, ensuring that Victoria Robert would spend the rest of her golden years in a stark prison cell, stripped of her wealth and her family name. Thomas, facing the heavy consequences of fraud and medical kidnapping, voluntarily surrendered his rights and quietly left the country, leaving behind a letter begging for a forgiveness that would take years to fully bloom. 6 months later, the sun set gently over a quiet, private beach behind a secluded coastal villa. The sound of waves crashing against the shoreline blended perfectly with the joyous laughter of 3 children chasing a golden retriever along the wet sand. Vance stood on the wooden deck, leaning against the railing with a cup of coffee in his hand. The heavy, suffocating walls he had built around his heart for 6 long years had completely crumbled. His custom billionaire suits were locked away in the city. Tonight, he wore a soft linen shirt, his face relaxed and full of a peace he thought he had lost forever. A pair of slender arms wrapped gently around his waist from behind. Vance smiled, placing his hands over hers, turning around to pull Winnie into his chest. "Are they wearing themselves out yet?" Winnie asked naturally, a soft laugh bubbling in her throat as she looked out at the triplets building a massive sandcastle on the shore. "I think they have more energy than my entire corporate board combined," Vance chuckled, resting his chin gently against the top of her head. He inhaled the sweet, familiar scent of her hair, a reality he still thanked God for every single morning. Winnie leaned back, looking up into his icy blue eyes. The headaches were completely gone now, the remaining fragments of her memory having slotted back into place like a beautifully completed puzzle. The trauma of the past had faded, replaced by the beautiful, overwhelming reality of the present. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Vance," she said softly, her voice full of a deep, emotional warmth. "Thank you for finding me in the dark." "I told you once in that old library," Vance whispered, his eyes shining with a profound tenderness as he reached into his pocket and pulled out her original silver wedding ring, sliding it gently back onto her finger where it belonged. "I don't care what the world says is impossible. I love you, Winnie. Yesterday, today, and for every single tomorrow we have left." Winnie smiled through a blur of sweet, happy tears, pulling his face down to meet hers. As their lips met beneath the golden glow of the setting sun, the long years of grief, betrayal, and lost time finally melted away, leaving behind a family made whole and a love that had truly refused to die.